The world is erupting into war zones right now, and it's quite scary because most of us don't even know the origin of these conflicts, and we are just hoping they don't hit close to home. But Israel and Palestine is a different type of conflict because it has caught the attention of the entire world, and it has made people clearly and distinctly pick a side. The first indication for me that a situation is complex is when I see two clear sides being drawn, when there's polarization. This is because geopolitics is very complicated, unlike a disagreement between two people, where even then it gets complicated. Most geopolitical conflicts span even centuries, thousands of years, and are entangled with so many different nuances, just like this one today. And in a day and age where information is just at our fingertips, it is quite overwhelming when you try to Google which side is the wrong side and the right side, and all you see is just the lineup of articles that are either siding with one side or the other. And especially with modern day Google search, where if you just Google, there's already a sentence outlined of what you're looking for on top. Research has stopped to become one of our best qualities. It's just easier to follow a voice that you trust and side with their opinion rather than try to find out. We've always known that Israel and Palestine are not the best of friends, and in passing we have come across hashtags like Free Palestine or For Israel, but the difference is most of us don't even know the difference between Gaza and Palestine, or that Israel just became a thing in 1948, or how a predominantly white presenting population that is Jewish came to exist in a predominantly Arab and Muslim region. So the real question is, how did we get here? This was not as easy as a quick Google search. It was quickly browsing through different articles and comments and videos, and each of them were very polarized. So I'm hoping that I can represent this history as unbiased as I possibly can. 2,000 years ago, the Jews had existed in the land known as Israel today for 1,000 years prior. At this point, the Romans invaded, destroyed the Holy Temple, exiled a huge portion of the population, and renamed the land Palestine. So for the next 2,000 years, despite the small population of Jews that remained, and the different colonizations that came and went, and being left sparsely populated after the Ottoman Empire's demise, throughout all this, the land remained predominantly Arab. For 2,000 years, they had set their roots here. This had become home. But the displaced Jews had passed down the story of the promised land, which is Israel, from generation to generation in hope that one day they would return to their motherland. Fast forward to the late 19th century, the hope had turned into desperation. That manifested in the movement called the Zionist movement. This is because anti-Semitism had grown in Europe due to the rising nationalism in the continent. After the Ottoman Empire lost during World War I, the region was divided into individual nations. The newly formed League of Nations at the time, which is known to be a predecessor to the UN, gave control of Palestine to the British government in order for them to implement the Balfour Agreement, which was an agreement or promise that they would establish a home for the Jews in Palestine, which obviously did not sit well with the Palestinians. Already they were under the British rule, and then again they were being told that their home was going to be gifted away to another group. This fear of losing their home led to the movement that is Palestinian nationalism, where the goal was to gain independence. What made the fear even more realistic is that Jews started to immigrate into Palestine at very large numbers, purchasing land and settling down. By the eve of World War II, the Jewish population had grown to 600,000, compared to only 84,000 in 1922. This led to a lot of Jewish-Arab conflict. This, combined with attacks on British personnel by some Jewish extremists in order to rush the process, led to the British government announcing that they were choosing to end their mandate, or looking to end their mandate in this area. After the British decided to pull out in 1947, the UN delegated a special committee known as UNSCOP that recommended that instead of an independent state, they would be separated into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, that would be joined by economic union. While the Jews agreed, the Arab states rejected the plan, but nevertheless, it was already agreed on. So the very day the British ended their mandate, Israel was declared an independent state on May 14, 1948. There are different perspectives as to what happened after this point, but I tried to put it together to the best of my abilities. So So seeing this, the Palestinians, with the help of some Arab states, decided to come together to fight for their home. And the Jews decided to protect their newly found long-lost home. After 15 months of war, the greater ammunition won. And so the Palestinians were forced to retreat into parts that were still Arab, like the Gaza Strip and West Bank. And others decided to ditch the country entirely and go to other Arab nations, like Egypt and Jordan, and became refugees. In 1967, Arab nations apparently once again came together in hopes to take ownership of their home. But once again, Israel defended its ancestral home and were victorious in what is known as the Six-Day War. They also took this opportunity to capture more areas like the West Bank from Jordan and Gaza and a few other territories. A lot more happened in that period and even from then until now. But what we have covered so far seems to be a summary of the root of all conflict up until now. Till this day, most Arab nations refuse to acknowledge Israel as a country, and Palestinians still hope for a day when they will go back to their country. European nationalism really created hell for the Jews, especially since they had no home to return to, and this was the time period of the Holocaust. So it is no surprise that they resorted to a very drastic measure, which was an ancestral home. The Jewish movement is more than a religion. It's normal to hear Judaism when you first hear a Jew, but that is just their religion. The entire Jewish movement encompasses religion, ethnicity, and community. So they are known as an ethno-religious group, which is basically a tribe, and every tribe needs a home that they belong to. After being exiled more than 2,000 years ago, they have never found a home again. It's only natural to cling to a place where you once belonged before everything went wrong. No matter how long ago it was, we see this mentality even in nations that were former colonies that have not yet achieved their peak of economic growth. They fantasize about a time before the colonizers came. What would they have become? What would life have looked like? For a country so small, they rank 18 out of the 145 countries that are considered for annual global firepower review. That means they are always in fight or flight mode because they are aware of what they are surrounded by. They are surrounded by countries who don't even acknowledge or approve of their existence. The thing with religious groups is that the concept of time completely shifts when dealing with God. 1,000 or 2,000 years mean nothing when it comes to his promises. We see this in biblical stories where the Israelites were waiting 430 years before their promised savior, who was Moses, came to save them. We also see this in the case of Jesus, where Isaiah had prophesied 700 years before Jesus actually came, and the faith until that point was unwavering that a savior was coming. We see it even today. It's been over 2,000 years since Jesus, and we're still waiting for the soon coming of the savior and for the world to end soon. So to see their long-standing belief that after 2,000 years they would return to their promised land is not surprising. Another thing religious groups tend to have is what I call the chosen mindset syndrome. Everyone has it, but it is in a higher degree when it comes to religious groups. It's one of the best ways to cope with tragedy. The most common way to aid our suffering when we feel helpless is by believing that all this is just for the plot. You are suffering because people know how great you are and they want to bring you down. But it can also be very dangerous because it lets you believe that you are right and you are special and everybody else is wrong and evil.
Another point I wanted to bring up is the presence of a minority that represents the history of a nation. I think it's really easy to forget about a history when there is no reminder, but when a nation is colonized and its indigenous people are either killed or exiled, minority that are left are so a reminder of a painful history. So just like the Aboriginals of Australia and the Native Americans in the US, the constant presence of the Jews in those 2,000 years gave relevance to the conversation of whose land is this anyway.
How frustrated do you have to be to start a war with a country that is superior to you in military, both manpower and ammunition, in alliances, in resources, in land, in population, in positive representation, and optics? Gaza says this was not a first punch. This was a response to years and years of oppression. Israel says they don't control Gaza and had left it alone. That's a hard point to defend considering the recent blockade. With the snap of a finger, Israel cut off water, fuel, food, medical supplies, and electricity getting into Gaza. With that much power over the livelihoods of an entire people, is it far-fetched to consider that there have been some forms of oppression in the past, especially considering the history? Gaza survives at the mercy of aid. More than 70% of Gaza is refugees. The entrance of goods is restricted. They live on 4 hours of electricity daily and a supply of water that is 95% contaminated. The conditions in Gaza have been described as an open-air prison. So is it also far-fetched to believe that they are equally living in hope of returning to their homeland before everything went south, just like Israel did? After being exiled and villainized from their own home, is it surprising to hope for a point when things were okay? And finally, because of the poor living conditions in Gaza, the population is overwhelmingly young, with the median age being 18 and 65% of the population being under the age of 24. That means most of the population was not even born yet to see the reason that they are suffering. Is that what reparations look like? This situation has brought up a lot of questions, like what is more important, an ancestral home or a home? How long is too long to pay for the sins of your forefathers? Or to claim something is still yours, to claim you are suffering from the oppressions of those who came before you. And because conquests happen throughout history, are we just supposed to accept it as life as we know it? Should the losers just retreat and accept their fate? A lot of things are happening in the world right now that are reminiscent of a time that I'm choosing not to mention. Wars are arising in very polarized areas, and governments are starting to pick sides and create alliances. So there are some of us who want to pick a side. There are some of us who are overwhelmed and drained because even though they want to help, they don't know where to start. And there are some who couldn't care less. All viewpoints are valid. But when the time does come that you should pick a side, I hope you pick the right side, which is to be human. Because in war, it's not the evil politician or the generic crown terrorist that suffers. It's us. It's you and me. You who wants to succeed in your career so that you can take care of your loved ones. You who wants to travel the world. You who wants to fall in love, to create your own family. You who wants to change the world. You and I exist on both sides of this conflict. And that's the worst part about war, because the general population would rather just coexist. It's that when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. But regardless, I am hopeful because for the first time in history, we have access to first-hand information and access to each other. For the first time, we have the opportunity to see every member of every community as a human, having a human experience. And seeing the opposing side as a human, as a person, rather than the other, is the most revolutionary thing that can happen in a time of conflict. So in this period of time, take the time to share knowledge, take the time to share a human experience. And most importantly, take the time to explore out of your algorithm. Recommend content that shows a group in a more positive light. Let's call it the humanization project. Every war has been founded on the belief that the other side is evil and inhumane. But now that we know that, it is a sign of hope, because it is only those who do not learn from history that are bound to repeat it. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.